Hi, I am Chris from Climate State, and in this video we take a look at a recent 2017 study, The Human Physiological Impact of Global Deoxygenation, published January 2017 in the Journal of Physiological Sciences by Daniel Martin, Helen McKenna and Valerie Levina. There has been a clear decline in the volume of oxygen in Earth's atmosphere over the past 20 years. Also, the magnitude of this decrease appears small compared to the amount of oxygen in the atmosphere. It is difficult to predict how this process may evolve due to the brevity of the collected records. A recently proposed model predicts a nonlinear decay, which would result in an increasingly rapid fall-off in atmospheric oxygen concentration with potentially devastating consequences for human health. We discuss the impact that global deoxygenation over hundreds of generations might have on human physiology. Exploring the changes between different net of high altitude populations provides a paradigm of how humans might tolerate worsening hypoxia over time. Using this model of atmospheric change, we predict that humans may continue to survive in an unprotected atmosphere for about 3,600 years. Accordingly, without dramatic changes in the way in which we interact with our planet, humans may lose their dominance on Earth during the next few millennia. Introduction. Human dominion over planet Earth is driving profound changes that may culminate in extinction. Loss of natural vegetation and the burning of fossil fuels are altering our atmosphere at an alarming rate. Two interconnected themes have received the most attention: the accelerated rise in atmospheric carbon dioxide concentration and the escalation of global temperatures. These changes are accompanied by natural phenomena with potentially catastrophic consequences, such as increasingly unpredictable climate subsystem and rising sea levels from polar ice cap recession. If such environmental hazards were not sufficient threat to the survival of Earth's 7 billion plus human inhabitants, there is yet another concerning change already underway: global deoxygenation. Also, the current volume of oxygen in our atmosphere is vast. It is diminishing inexorably, and yet this does not appear to be a priority for environmental concern. While the dynamics of oxygen decline is highly contentious, a new model of its nonlinear nature predicts total oxygen depletion within several thousand years. This disruption of Earth's fragile ecosystem could be the final straw for humans and the many other forms of life that rely on oxygen to generate energy. Here we discuss the biological significance of atmospheric oxygen, the proposed model of its decline, and its potential impact on human survival. Oxygen and Earth's atmosphere. Molecular oxygen, O2, is arguably one of the most important elements on Earth, particularly for aerobic organisms that depend on it to release energy from carbon-based macromolecules. The concentration of oxygen in the atmosphere is 20.95%, 209,460 ppm, but this has fluctuated markedly throughout history. Earth is about 4.5 billion years old, and its early atmosphere contained virtually no oxygen whatsoever. The primitive atmosphere was instead formed mainly of hydrogen, with traces of methane and ammonia. Volcanoes then leached nitrogen and carbon dioxide into this mixture, but it was not until the Great Oxygenation Event about 2.3 billion years ago that oxygen was released into the atmosphere by cyanobacteria that used carbon dioxide and sunlight to generate energy via photosynthesis. As photosynthesizing cells spread across the planet, they eventually developed into complex multicellular complex plants. This crucial event in the developing ecosystem changed the world from a barely habitable rock into the luscious green environment that we recognize today. Over time, oxygen became the predominant mechanism for energy to be generated by non-photosynthesizing cells through oxidative phosphorylation in mitochondria. As billions of years passed, an equilibrium was established whereby the concentration of oxygen fluctuated within a habitable range between about 15 and 35%, which has been maintained from the beginning of the Cambrian period 540 million years ago until the present day. Each surge in the atmosphere's oxygen concentration was accompanied by a new burst of life, while the troughs were associated with downscaling and extinction of species. The oscillation of the atmospheric oxygen concentration around a level that optimally promotes the development of multicellular organisms is termed the global oxygen cycle. But what are the margins for the existence of complex life on Earth, particularly humans? As global deoxygenation is a reality, understanding the impact of declining atmospheric oxygen on human physiology is of increasing importance. Defining the lower limit of atmospheric oxygen compatible with human survival will inform predictions of how long our species can persist on a planet undergoing progressive asphyxiation. The decline in global oxygen concentration. Since 1989, detailed recordings from atmospheric air have been taken in order to monitor global concentrations of carbon dioxide and oxygen. Observational records of atmospheric oxygen concentration from several stations around the globe are maintained within the Scripps Institute Oxygen Program. Oxygen measurements are reported as changes in oxygen-nitrogen O2N2 ratio of sampled air relative to a reference air pumped in the mid-1980s and stored in the Scripps laboratory. The unit for these measurements is per Mach, which means that a decline of 1 per Mach is equivalent to a 0.0001% decline of oxygen concentration. Put another way, 1 per Mach indicates 1 molecule out of 1 million oxygen molecules, or roughly 1 molecule in 4.8 million molecules of air. Because natural variation of nitrogen concentration is much smaller than that for oxygen and its concentration is much higher, changes in O2N2 ratio primarily reflect changes in oxygen concentration. According to the Scripps Institute, the oxygen concentration is currently declining by about 19% Mach per year, equivalent to 4 ppm per year. This graph here shows the change in oxygen concentration ratio over time recorded at Alert Station in Canada with a parabolic fitted decay curve. For the B figure, the projected decline based in oxygen concentration over time using data from 9 recording stations in the Scripps program. The uncertainty of the projection based on the 9 observational records around the globe is shown in the gray shaded area here. The red dotted line denotes lowest oxygen concentration likely to be tolerated by humans and time from now at which this will occur. So in about 3,600 years, the decline in oxygen will become critical to human survival and is projected to further decline. From the original Scripps Institute data, it was hypothesized that the decline in atmospheric oxygen concentration was linear. However, as the dataset grows, it has been proposed that this may not be the case. One possible scenario is a parabolic decline because the observed records span only a few decades. Projection of this decay is highly uncertain and the complexity of the biogeochemical interactions makes such a projection a challenging task. However, this new mathematical model proposes that the horizon of oxygen decline will be reached much sooner than previously estimated from a linear model, leaving only a few thousand years until total oxygen depletion. If we apply this parabolic projection to the currently available observed data, it predicts that the concentration of oxygen in the atmosphere will reach zero in about 4,400 years, passing beyond the halfway point in about 3,600 years. The dynamics of oxygen decline is approximated by using a stochastic model. The model realistically reproduces oxygen data as a combination of a declining global trend, seasonal periodicity, and a smaller scale fluctuations of fire frequency. This oscillating decline can be clearly seen in the Scripps Institute data. Why is atmospheric oxygen concentration declining? Earth's atmosphere, like most biological systems, is in a constant state of flux, governed by oxygen's generation and destruction, natural processes that surround us every day. The primary source of oxygen on Earth is photosynthesis, the generation of carbohydrates from carbon dioxide and water using sunlight as a catalyst. Higher plants, algae, cyanobacteria, and chlorophytes are all capable of photosynthesis. A tiny amount of molecular oxygen is also produced by the photolysis of water vapor in the upper atmosphere. The end users of molecular oxygen are aerobic life forms, including humans, which use it to generate the majority of their energy requirements. Oxygen is also used during photorespiration, in which organic substrates are oxidized to yield ATP for energetic processes in some photosynthesizing cells. ATP, adenosine triphosphate, is a nucleotide and is a small molecule used in cells as a coenzyme. It is often referred to as the molecular unit of currency of intracellular energy transfer. The atmosphere and sea act as the main reservoir for oxygen, and major events such as natural fires can alter the balance to a minor degree. Therefore, in simple terms, if the number of plants decreases, the oxygen generating capacity of the Earth is reduced. And if the number of animals, including humans, increases, the oxygen consumption will rise. Combustion of fossil fuels has a major impact on oxygen and carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere, there being a correlation between fossil fuel-related global warming and depletion of oxygen from the oceans. Furthermore, oxygen is consumed not only when fossil fuels are used in combustion, so the relation between decline of oxygen and rise in carbon dioxide is not linear. For example, oxygen is consumed in many oxidation processes in industry for materials manufacturing where there is no direct combustion of fossil fuels. One of the uncertain factors in the model of oxygen decline lies in the rise of new technologies which may appear green in terms of carbon dioxide emissions, but at the same time would deplete oxygen. Waning of atmospheric oxygen concentration will also have knock-on effects in the ocean. Henry's law determines the amount of gas that dissolves into a liquid, and as the atmospheric partial pressure of oxygen, PaO2, declines, oxygen will diffuse out of the water, leading to further oceanic deoxygenation, depriving the underwater world of the oxygen it requires to survive. It has been estimated that about 17% of atmospheric oxygen is produced in the oceans by photosynthesis in phytoplankton. There is concern that uncontrolled global warming could lead to a catastrophic loss of this vital source of atmospheric oxygen through inhibition of photosynthesis. Biological impact of atmospheric deoxygenation. The biological effect of a gas is determined by its partial pressure, which, according to Dalton's law, is equal to the product of barometric pressure and the fractional concentration of the gas in the mixture. For example, at sea level, PaO2 is about 21 kPa, sea level barometric pressure 101 kPa multiplied fractional concentration of oxygen 0.21. Thus, atmospheric hypoxia may result from either a decline in oxygen concentration, normobaric hypoxia, or a reduction in barometric pressure, hypobaric hypoxia. Differences in the biological responses to these situations are subtle but not completely insignificant. For humans, the principal consequence of a fall in PaO2 is hypoxemia, a lack of oxygen in the blood, resulting in reduced delivery of oxygen to the tissues, tissue hypoxia. This occurs during ascent to high altitude due to the exponential decline in barometric pressure, about 1,500 to 2,500 meters, depending upon the individual. Hypoxemia can lead to altitude-related illnesses such as acute mountain sickness, AMS. Hypoxemia and tissue hypoxia can also result from many pathophysiological states that impair oxygen transport, such as respiratory and cardiovascular diseases. Humans have the ability to adapt to hypoxemia through a process known as acclimatization, but the extent to which adaptation can compensate for the oxygen deficit depends on the magnitude of the deficit and the time over which it occurs. Hypoxia, survival limits, and human extinction. Even with genetic phenotypic adaptation, the parabolic decline described by this mathematical model predicts a scenario in which atmospheric oxygen concentration falls to levels below the threshold where human survival and reproduction may be sustained. Defining this point in terms of oxygen concentration is difficult, and our hypothesis is based on the highest elevations known to sustain lifelong human habitation. The highest permanent settlement in the present day in the Peruvian village of La Rinconada. The highest permanent settlement in the present day is the Peruvian village of La Rinconada at an altitude of 5,100 meters, which has around 30,000 inhabitants. Native villagers have survived there for at least 40 years, and current residents have successfully gone through childbirth to create the next generation at this altitude. However, it is not known whether the birth rate can sustain this population indefinitely. The highest permanent settlement on record is the now abandoned Chilean mining village of Chilcha, 5,340 meters, which was discovered by the 1935 International High-Altitude Expedition in Chile. It has been argued that this represents the upper limit of long-term human habitation, because the residents chose to sleep at this elevation and make a daily ascent to the mine above. PET O2 at the Chilcha settlement is 11.3 kPa, slightly higher than 50% of the current PET O2 at sea level. The parabolic deoxygenation model described here predicts that PET O2 at sea level will reach this threshold in about 3,600 years from now. During this time, the human species is likely to undergo further positive selection for physiological phenotypes, conveying survival advantage in hypoxic conditions. Studies of high-altitude residents tell us that while such adaptations may enable us to function relatively well in an atmosphere that contains just over half the oxygen we breathe today, many will suffer the long-term consequences. Higher rates of maternal pre-eclampsia death, increased perinatal mortality, low birth weight, and the myriad consequences of this in adulthood, and escalating pulmonary disease will curtail life expectancy and population growth. Those individuals with independent comorbidities, particularly chronic respiratory and cardiac disease, may suffer exacerbation of their symptoms, reduced function, and reduced length of life. Highlanders may be forced to descend as life becomes intolerable at hypobaric elevations, therefore reducing the surface of Earth that we can populate. The burden of ill health will begin to overwhelm the capability of healthcare services. The last prevailing human phenotypes may resemble those of current high-altitude populations with enhanced abilities to extract precious oxygen from the atmosphere or deliver it to the tissues, and perhaps superior cellular mechanisms to improve efficiency of oxygen use and defend against hypoxic stress. It is important to stress that the parabolic model described here is mathematical rather than geophysical. Other authors have disputed the idea that global deoxygenation on a catastrophic scale is possible. One of the key reasons cited for this is that the determining factor in global oxygen decline is fossil fuel usage, and current estimates predict that oil, coal, and gas stocks will last 35, 107, and 37 years, respectively. Thus, it is plausible that the increased fossil fuel usage in recent years has caused a temporary acceleration of the deoxygenation phenomenon, which will resolve once reserves have been exhausted. This scenario would predict a very different decline in atmospheric oxygen from the one we have described, with a fall-off only a fraction of a percent in 4,400 years. Consensus in this area has not yet been achieved, but the need to understand the limits of long-term human survival under progressively hypoxic conditions cannot be questioned. Whether we are considering the persistence of the human race in the mathematical model discussed here, or other contexts in which atmospheric oxygen may be scarce, such as future long-term space expeditions. Other environmental changes may also impact the ability of humans to acclimatize to hypoxia during global deoxygenation, and these includes a rise in both temperature and concentration of carbon dioxide. It is hard to predict the precise effect of these additional physiological stressors, but both are likely to reduce further our chances of long-term survival. In particular, rising carbon dioxide levels could lead to metabolic problems if individuals fail to adapt to this adequately. High blood carbon dioxide levels, hypercapnia, can cause acidosis, hypertension, and tachycardia. Those with underlying lung chronic disease may suffer greatest from this. In a simple short-term experimental model of Earth's atmosphere, a novel experiment that used plants to generate oxygen and consume carbon dioxide in a sealed hypoxic chamber noted a high carbon concentration, 0.66%, towards the end of the 48-hour experiment. The atmospheric changes will also impact other animals on Earth, and failure to adapt will result in extinction both on land and in the seas and oceans. All aerobic life forms will suffer as oxygen is removed from the atmosphere. In addition, plant metabolism may also be detrimentally affected. Already, the rising carbon dioxide concentrations has been predicted to reduce the rate of photorespiration, and the falling oxygen concentration may exacerbate this. While the overall effect of a reduction in photorespiration remains unclear, we do know that complete removal of this pathway could lead to a metabolic disaster for the plants that use it. Conclusions. Progressive asphyxiation of the planet would ultimately lead to the demise of humankind through escalating infant mortality and eventually complete failure to reproduce. Perhaps technological advancement could permit the continuation of life within biospheres in the short term, but beyond this, the outside world would become a barren and inhospitable place. It is not possible to predict with certainty the threshold value at which mass extinction becomes inevitable, but we have no evidence that humans can persist for more than a generation in an atmosphere containing half the amount of oxygen currently available at sea level, a situation that, according to a new model, could be upon us in a few thousand years, unless the process of global deoxygenation is reversed, either by increasing oxygen production or by reducing its consumption. The human race, as obligate aerobes, will be left behind forever, our domination of this planet a brief footnote in its history. This video does not include the sections on adaptation to acute hypoxia, adaptation to subacute hypoxia, and lifelong hypoxia exposure. If you found this video informative, I appreciate your support for upcoming Climate State productions. You can become a Climate State Patreon or donate directly with PayPal. Thank you for watching and have a great day. Volume of oxygen in our atmosphere is vast, it is diminishing inexorably, and yet this does not appear to be a priority for environmental concern. While the dynamics of oxygen decline is highly contentious, a new model of its nonlinear nature predicts total oxygen depletion within several thousand years. This disruption of Earth's fragile ecosystem could be the final straw for humans and the many other forms of life that rely on oxygen to generate energy. Here we discuss the biological significance of atmospheric oxygen, the proposed model of its decline, and its potential impact on human survival. Oxygen and Earth's atmosphere. Molecular oxygen, O2, is arguably one of the most important elements on Earth, particularly for aerobic organisms that depend on it to release energy from carbon-based macromolecules. The concentration of oxygen in the atmosphere is 20.95%, 209,460 ppm, but this has fluctuated markedly throughout history. Earth is about 4.5 billion years old, and its early atmosphere contained virtually no oxygen whatsoever. The primitive atmosphere was instead formed mainly of hydrogen, with traces of methane and ammonia. Volcanoes then leached nitrogen and carbon dioxide into this mixture, a fact that global deoxygenation over hundreds of generations might have on human physiology. Exploring the changes between different native high-altitude populations provides a paradigm of how humans might tolerate worsening hypoxia over time. Using this model of atmospheric change, we predict that humans may continue to survive in an unprotected atmosphere for about 3,600 years. Accordingly, Without dramatic changes in the way in which we interact with our planet, humans may lose their dominance on Earth during the next few millennia. Introduction. Hi, I am Chris from Climate State, and in this video we take a look at a recent 2017 study, The Human Physiological Impact of Global Deoxygenation, published January 2017 in the Journal of Physiological Sciences by Daniel Martin, Helen McKenna and Valerie Levina. There has been a clear decline in the volume of oxygen in Earth's atmosphere over the past 20 years. Also, the magnitude of this decrease appears small compared to the amount of oxygen in the atmosphere. It is difficult to predict how this process may evolve due to the brevity of the collected records. A recently proposed model predicts a non-linear decay, which would result in an increasingly rapid fall-off in atmospheric oxygen concentration with potential devastating consequences for human health. We discuss the impact. Human dominion over planet Earth is driving profound changes that may culminate in extinction. Loss of natural vegetation and the burning of fossil fuels are altering our atmosphere at an alarming rate. Two interconnected themes have received the most attention: the accelerated rise in atmospheric carbon dioxide concentration and the escalation of global temperatures. These changes are accompanied by natural phenomena with potentially catastrophic consequences, such as increasingly unpredictable climate subsystem and rising sea levels from polar ice cap recession. If such environmental hazards were not sufficient threat to the survival of Earth's 7 billion plus human inhabitants, there is yet another concerning change already underway: global deoxygenation. Also, the current